I want to thank everybody for joining in the middle of their day for a very, very important topic and discussion, which is, of course, today's webinar, which is the Great Realignment on the Muslim American votes. As we can all see, the political, social, and cultural landscapes for American Muslims have undergone a profound transformation. And I believe that all of us, our panelists, our distinguished panelists that are going to be joining today, all have a very unique perspective coming from their own heritage, their own Muslim American identity, their own journeys, and their own work. And I really want to kind of just dive right into the conversation. Now, from Mala's end, we conducted a poll back in September of this year with the Rainey Center, which really tried to capture the pulse and temperature of the Muslim American community and their opinions on domestic issues. And it was a very surprising, findings contrary to the things that we see on the media, that Muslim Americans are actually very centered and lean towards Republican values on a range of social and domestic issues. And so this really broke the monolith of Muslim Americans being single issue voters, or really just focused on one topic, or just being, far left voters. So there's a lot of nuances in our community that I think it's very interesting after this election for us to find different ways of leadership now within our community. So I want to introduce our panelists. Of course, this will be a very dynamic and relaxed and engaged conversation. And at the end, we will have a Q&A to get some questions from the audience. And we will also be sharing and posting this link as we wrap it up. So you can share it, you can connect with us, and all of our panelists' information and social media handles will also be included. So today it's an honor to have Khalid Lul, who's my own colleague with Mala. He is a board of director and the managing director for Mala. And his charitable work with Mala was recognized by Congress, by members in, Representative Andy King, Lee Zeldin. He also spearheads Mala's LGBTQ initiatives and leads our Muslim American philanthropy initiatives. Then we have Hama Mektali, who is the co-founder and CEO of the Emma Lazarus Institute for Liberty and Tolerance. She's a policy advisor, entrepreneur, activist, and artist. And she also was a Wynn Fellow at the Atlantic Council, a convener at Israel Policy Forum, and a 40 Under 40 awardee of the Middle East Policy Council. So thank you, Kama, for joining us. And we also have today Faisal Saeed Al-Muthar, a very near and dear friend and a mentor that I look up to as well. Faisal has founded the organization Ideas Beyond Borders, which is a massive national nonprofit, international nonprofit dedicated to transforming the Middle East through ideas, through Wikipedia, through education, through new ideas, fresh perspectives. He recently just gave a TED Talk on freedom and liberty and standing up against extremism. And I, encourage everybody to check it out and really hear his words and voices. He's written many spectacular pieces, and you can find him on social media as well. But, Faisal, your leadership is always, always so welcomed and respected. And of course, we have Ahmed Fouad Al-Khatib. So Ahmed, thank you so much for joining us as well. Ahmed is a Palestinian American humanitarian activist and a blogger. He was the founder of Project Unified Assistance, which is the nonprofit organization that worked on humanitarian airport in the Gaza Strip. And Ahmed is now with the Atlantic Council, and he also has written some profound pieces on peace in the Middle East as a Gazan American. So Ahmed, as always, thank you for your leadership, for your courage, and for sharing your voice. And really excited to dive into everybody's perspectives on this topic. So kind of going into, I'll kind of just ask Cal to start the conversation. You've been on the ground with the Muslim American community working on a range of issues, domestic policies, social policies, and, in New Jersey, New York, and Washington, D.C. And really this election kind of, broke all the misconceptions of Muslim Americans and the topics and the domestic issues that, are pertainable to them. So can you share a little bit about what you've seen and how this election really, supported a different thesis in a way?
Absolutely. Thank you, Zainab. First of all, thank you for the amazing introduction, and I want to thank all of our panelists and everyone who attended. So we've been engaging the Muslim and Arab community and mobilizing and getting a lot of feedback. And there's a misconception that the Muslim and Arab American population is only focused on foreign policy. We found that to not be true. There's a lot of factors why this shift happened, including immigration law, foreign policy is one of them, social and cultural issues, and many other factors. And the trend towards the Republican Party amongst certain segments of the Muslim and Arab communities highlights the complex and evolving political landscape. And I want to just talk about social and cultural issues because that's what I specialize in. So over the years, cultural and social issues like LGBTQ rights, abortion, and religious freedom have become increasingly prominent in American politics. And because a lot of conservative Muslims agree with conservative Christians when it comes to these policies, that's what made the Republican Party more favorable to these individuals. And also, there's a very small segment of the Muslim and Arab community that provided feedback that the reason why they shifted from the Democratic Party to the Republican is out of kind of like resentment to prove a point that their voices weren't heard pre-elections, especially with foreign policy. And that's why they decided to give their votes to the Republican Party to kind of prove a point that if you don't meet our demands and needs, we're going to shift to the other party. And this is not the first time this happened in American history. If we all remember post 9/11, Muslims also shifted from one party to the other because of what was going on and the laws that were kind of anti-Muslim here in the country.
Going into thank you, Cal. That's very insightful from your perspective. And Ahmed, I'm gonna kind of bring the question to you. I obviously just kind of post October 7th, there was a huge push, I think, of Muslims voting a particular way, which kind of contradicts what Cal was saying is all the different nuances and the other domestic issues that are very relevant for Muslim Americans, given their own history post 9/11. Many people that are not old enough that are watching here, there was a lot of victimhood and grievance narrative that also became a cudgel for political landscape involvement for Muslim Americans. So what's your perspective? I'd love to just have you kind of dive in as a Gazan American and your perspective and your view on this.
Well, thanks again for hosting me and everyone else, and good to see so many familiar faces. And Faisal, hello, nice to see you again.
Hello, Habibi.
So it has been really fascinating to see the shift this last election cycle, particularly around the issue in Gaza, particularly around there's two parallel tracks happening when it comes to the shift and the realignment of the Muslim electorate in the United States. The first of which was certainly undeniably foreign policy driven, and I'll get to that in a second. But the second I would say was that the Muslim community, and it's really hard to, I mean, the Muslim community is such a wide umbrella under which exists. Arab Muslims are different than Sunni versus Shia Muslims, than Pakistani or Bangladeshi Muslims, than Indonesian or Turkish or European Muslims. And so certainly not a monolithic group. They're just like any other electorate in the United States who care about the borders and inflation and safety and what is being taught in the schools and drag queen story hours and social issues that they feel strongly about. And so it just so happens that this realignment coincided with a particularly divisive, intense, inflammatory war or series of wars and conflagrations in the Middle East, in which many felt that the United States or that the Biden administration was either not doing enough to stop them, or was dumping a lot of fuel on the fire by giving an unlimited amount of support to Israel's war machine without reining that back, or at least exercising American leverage over the Israeli government to try and, achieve some kind of an off-ramp. So I wouldn't separate the foreign policy component from the domestic element in converging and making this such a dramatic realignment as we saw. Now, I'm missing my brother Omar Qudrat from this webinar. He certainly would be one to emphasize the role of the domestic much more than, and he's long been an advocate in decoupling how the Muslim American vote proceeds, is viewed, analyzed, and engaged, irrespective of wars in the Middle East or conflicts abroad. But that, to me, I mean, I was in California for up until 3 months ago, in the San Francisco Bay Area, which has a particular political leaning. And I would go randomly into these Arab stores, many of whom were either Yemeni or Palestinians, and some of them were Christian, some of them were Muslim, many Muslim, and they would regularly speak of their frustration of the administration, but it was not just about the foreign policy components. So it's really fascinating to see them both come in. And then finally, just going back to my brother Omar, who's not here, who wrote, who's spoken about the Muslim vote as being the sleeping giant, if you will, that was undermined, overlooked, and thought, and was taken for granted by the Democratic Party. And this election proved otherwise.
Yeah, absolutely. And I definitely can attest to a lot of the domestic policy issues that have been concerning for Muslim Americans, at least from Mala's polling and our future polling that we plan on doing, because of course, the polling, as we had shared, was previously, whatever was conducted was very biased, and it shared a very, very skewed narrative of the concerns of Muslim Americans. And that kind of goes into, Faisal, what I really wanted to ask you, and it ties in with what Ahmed is saying, you know, with the sense of just like this clash. You know, you're so passionate, you're a true libertarian when it comes to economics, when it comes to freedom, when it comes to democracy, and your work really embodies the ethos of those principles. And so for yourself, as like a very, your whole identity as a Muslim American, Arab man, you know, American, just, and the work that you've done, you know, here domestically, but also internationally, like what is the future for, you know, what now for, you know, Muslim American involvement and leadership? You know, how is this kind of been redefined with the values that you promote?
Thank you so much, Zainab. Well, I mean, by the way, I'm going to be in the Middle East region the next 3 weeks, so that actually going to give me a sense of what the region thinks as well of the elections, and I'm kind of really excited to meet with a lot of people there. I mean, one other thing actually to add is that these days actually reminds me a lot of the Obama era when Obama ended when Trump first won in 2016. Is that Obama managed to piss off pretty much everybody in the region. I remember when I went to the region after the election of Trump, but is that he managed to kind of to piss off the pro-Palestinian crowd, the pro-Israel crowd, and the Iranians and the Gulf, which is something that is like pretty difficult to do. So it was pretty impressive that Obama managed to like kind of piss off the entire region. And I think the same thing happens with the Biden administration. I mean, the Biden administration, at least for my last conversations with people in the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia and things like that, is that he was viewed as kind of very weak on Iran and the fact that with the democratic leadership is that they see America more in retreat and America is actually more weaker. So when it comes to us kind of domestically, as those of us who live here and vote here, and kind of the future, I think of is that, I mean, Mala is part of this in terms of kind of to like guide us to a certain direction. Is that we actually need a direction. I mean, the community is I would say, to kind of echo a bit what Ahmed was saying, it is like the community is polarized after October 7th. There is a lot of kind of divisions and these divisions are only growing. And I mean, there's the kind of you talk, Ahmed, about the Yemenis. I mean, for example, a significant amount of Yemenis were also screwed up by a lot of the pro-Iran policies that the Biden administration got in. And that's the reason why they ended up being refugees in the United States. And the same with the Iranian population who also like immigrated after 1979 and they see. So I think that there is a lot of work to be done on actual engagement, because I think there is a lot of engagement in activism, which we have seen, and that is institutionalized in terms of kind of Arab Association of New York, etc. But it's really not in any way positive. In fact, is like I would say argue is that many of these kind of established institutions of the Muslim community is moving more and more, moving Muslim Americans toward fringe positions. I mean, according to the CARE poll, which is I think the poll that is competitor to yours, is that it showed that Jill Stein was the most favorite candidate. And Jill Stein party couldn't vote in local municipality anywhere. Forget about winning the national elections, but it showed that the kind of the CARE direction, or not to mention any organization's name, but that is that they're moving kind of Muslim Americans to be out of touch with the rest of the American population. Because like if you people who went for Jill Stein camp, etc., you're pretty much out of touch with most of the electorate and the things that people are caring about. So I think is that we do need guidance. I think the community does need to do good job to really not necessarily become a cohesive group, but really to have its own interests understood, its own, and really show that diversity instead of now when we look at the reports on the media, it looks like all of us are a bunch of Green Party voters on one hand, or or kind of going the other direction. So I think I'm really supportive of Mala. I love what you guys are doing. I'm very glad that this conversation is happening, and really kind of see now what's next for us. Like what's the position, how to actually become more engaged in the American conversation and be part of this amazing country.
Yeah. Absolutely. And Faisal, I think you bring up some really good points. Each diaspora group, at least even from myself, from what I see, has responded differently to this election. I know, at least from my perspective, the Iranian American community is very pro-Trump. They're very pro-Israel as well. And that's contrary to a lot of what you see in the media when it comes to, but of course, each community is different. I know a lot of the Pakistani American community is also very pro-Trump, but that's because they're focused more on the US-Pakistan relations, right? So there's all these different things, which is, of course, foreign policy aside, coming back into the domestic issues of economics and immigration and school choice and, you know, all these other things that impact our daily lives. I kind of want to, I think both you and Ahmed bring up some really, really strong points when it comes to identity politics, right? When it comes to this, how Muslim Americans vote in identity politics. And Hama, I know this is something that is really, really something that you've done a lot of work on and have represented because you're Muslim and you're Jewish. And you kind of are coming from a perspective of breaking all those, you know, narratives and stereotypes of both communities. So I'd love to kind of hear from you on just this whole background of identity politics and how it's been used, you know, weaponized against Muslim Americans.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be amongst friends as well. First, I want to clarify to people because so many misunderstand what it means to have both Muslim and Jewish identities and sort of ancestries in one person. And so allow me to clarify. My mother is Muslim, my father is Jewish. Being Jewish is not just a religion, but it's also an ethnicity. So we're an ethno-religious community. And I think that's where a lot of misunderstandings around Jewish identity and sort of Jewish activism and even Muslim-Jewish relations and sort of interfaith dialogue really kind of misses the mark. Because being a Jew is seen by the majority of people as only a religion, when in actuality it's not. It's also an ethnic identity and a sort of shared sense of peoplehood. Now, I grew up in Morocco, in a majority Muslim country, so obviously, you know, went through Islamic education for 12 years, which was mandatory as part of the national curricula. So very fluent in Islam as a culture and relate to it as my culture as well. Now, on this issue of identity politics, unfortunately, what we have had happening across the democratic West, that in particular in the United States, where the conversation on identity politics has been really championed by the Democrats, is this infiltration of foreign lobbies and organizations who decided to speak on Muslims and through presenting a very sort of extremist version of what Islam and Muslims should look like, or supposed to look like, or supposed to vote or behave, and also investing in sidelining moderate Muslims. And when we come to sort of the ground, the grassroots, the field, we realize that the Muslim American is so complex, like many of you have shared and echoed the sentiment. And I think Democrats in that complex makeup of the Muslim and Arab voter and chose to reduce them to this tokenized stereotype based on not only just 20 years of voting history and a voting shift which was defined by a massive crisis, 9/11, a crisis that forced the Muslim and Arab voter to become a single issue voter. So in a sense, this is where I invite people to build bridges. This is very similar to where the Jewish community has found itself post-October 7th, really pushing the Jewish vote to become more of a single issue vote, focused on community safety and focused on foreign policy and Israel's right to exist, right? So you had that going on. Democrats totally misunderstanding, misrepresenting the identities, the culture, the voting patterns of the Arab and Muslim voter based on these 20 years of patterns that were really informed by a reaction of the community to a massive crisis. And on the other hand, you have this idea that Kal and many spoke to, which is that Muslim voters are generally rooted in faith, right? They are generally traditional communities. They have more conservative values. The man is the masculine provider in the family. And so we find a shift that is very similar to what happened with the Latino vote, where there is this culture of increased pressure and responsibility on men to provide for their families, in a socioeconomic ecosystem of scarcity, of, you know, insane inflation that has been affecting everyone. And we're also speaking about a demographic that isn't an elitist demographic. This is the working class of America. These are also recent immigrant communities who have fled persecution, fled extremism, understand what those patterns do to societies and economies. And at the end of the day, would rather fight for the chance to build a better lives for their kids in this country than even contemplate another option. They are American citizens and they want to create a prosperous future for their families, and for the sort of the next generation of Muslims in this country. So to them, I think this was a shift towards the sort of early, almost kind of romanticized Republican American ideal that drove a lot of these communities to immigrate in the first place and become American citizens. And I think that's a really important thing to take into consideration. Now, let's go back to identity politics, because I think it's funny enough, or I guess ironically, Democrats who preach and use and leverage and instrumentalize identity politics actually really failed to use them effectively when it comes to the Arab and Muslim communities. And Trump had an effective strategy to do so. He met with Arab media, with Muslim and Arab leaders, and presented this really well-packaged story of returning America and the world and the Middle East to a state of prosperity and stability. In fact, that very language, that emphasis on stability and prosperity, is literally the language of the Abraham Accords. And J.D. Vance, on election day, was seen and was quoted saying those exact keywords. And those are things that automatically translate well within the Muslim and the Arab voting communities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm just kind of gonna bring it out now. There's several things that I'd like to address that everybody kind of touched base on. Number one, it's the grievance narrative, right? That's always been kind of really used post 9/11. Number two, it's this it's this victimhood kind of narrative of Muslim Americans being either refugees or immigrants, forgetting the second, third, fourth generation Muslim Americans, the ones that are cultural Muslims, the ones that are secular Muslims, the ones that are of mixed heritage, right? Like Ahmed had said also, it's one of it is the broadest demographic minority group in the United States. And so now with this, I'd like to kind of, and I know my colleague Omar is not here today, but he has spoken beautifully on this entire thing on Islamophobia and this angle of how Muslims should be participating in the civic sector. And, quite frankly, this election kind of broke all those stereotypes and those norms. And in silence, we're hearing people say, in our community, oh yeah, I'm so glad, like now I voted for Trump too, but then on the public level, like they're ostracized for doing so. So I'd love to kind of hear in a way, how this community has kind of been conditioned and restricted in its own leadership, right? And how this kind of changes the course and the playing ground for us. So I'd like to kind of just open that up.
May I add something? I mean, I wouldn't be very optimistic, to be honest, about kind of that level. I mean, I'm kind of very worried that America might be more Europeanized. Every time I go to Europe, I see that the Muslim community, I think that the policies regarding the Muslim communities are either coming from guilt or they're coming from hate.
Oh,
And now the conversation in Europe is extremely polarized on Muslims and Muslim immigration. I mean, after Germany have accepted roughly 500,000 or so Syrian refugees or Muslim refugees from Syria, it actually led to rise of political parties now in both the European Union and on the parliament level asking for deporting many of these Muslims. So I think is that actually what I noticed when you talked about the victimization narrative, I mean, that's with many of the communities that actually went into Europe over the past kind of 6 decades or so, they have been fed that victimhood narrative. I mean, even though some of them emigrated to the West, they still held a lot of anti-Western beliefs or so like they might have moved to the West, but their brains are still in the Middle East. I mean, in fact, some of the communities that I interacted with in Europe, their number one channel is Al Jazeera Arabic, which is exactly what we watch back home. So what they did is that they built exactly copycats of what exists in their home countries to be in the West. And I saw that and there were entire systems of madrasas and others that were built that kind of make people more and more segregated from the communities at large within the West, which now leads to a rise of far right hate, etc. So I'm kind of very worried that the kind of the victimizing narrative that exists with Muslim Europeans, but actually have already taken some hold here in the States, which I think that in leading American Muslims more and more kind of disengaged from the civic life. I mean, we saw that the people who voted for Trump or otherwise, but we don't know if many of the people who didn't vote, who actually don't at all participate in the American public life. I mean, my brother used to work in Wayne State in Michigan, and therefore I've been kind of regular to kind of places in Dearborn and others. And Dearborn probably knows it's predominantly Lebanese, Iraqi, and Yemeni. But there's also other communities, and many of the people that I've met there have almost no participation in U.S. civic life. I mean, in fact, their entire life is within these couple zip codes, and that's pretty much it. So really, I wouldn't be that optimistic, Zainab, because we're seeing I mean, with the Abrahamic Accords, for example, I was in the United Arab Emirates when the Abrahamic Accords was signed, and everybody was in this kind of optimistic vision that everything is going to great. But what we didn't know that there was a lot of people who were against the Abrahamic Accords, and they hated the Abrahamic Accords. And then when October 7th happened, there were people celebrating October 7th. So these two realities exist at the same time. There is this reality, there's let's talk about the future, let's talk about regional integration and getting people together. And there was maybe equivalent, but much more hatred of all of that narrative. So the way when October 7th happened, there were people kind of justifying it or celebrating it as a way to deter the Abrahamic Accords. So I think these two narratives exist at the same time. And I think only future will decide, and it really depends on how much many of us here work to decide that future. Because it's actually, I would say, the jury is out, which narrative the Muslim community at large will adopt. And there is a conflict about that domestically in the Middle East, as I regularly work there and engage there. And there is obviously that conversation happens here as well, because just because somebody took a 12-hour flight from the region to the US doesn't mean that their values have changed. Is that they can be watching the same news source, they can be watching the same social media. The people that they engage with are entirely within the community. So there's a lot of really work for us to do in deciding which future as a community at large and as individuals, which ones to take.
Yeah, that reminds me, Ahmed, wow, those are some really, really, I've got to digest all of this, what you just said. And Ahmed, I know this is one of your really powerful statements. It always stays with me, two truths can't exist at the same time. And two realities, just like Faisal had said. So I'd love to kind of hear a little bit more.
Well, a couple of things about what Faisal just said. Number one is, I mean, there's an element of this, and I'm somebody who is historically very, very left. And I am a Democrat, and I'm a registered Democrat, though what that means to me now is radically different than what it meant to me years ago. And I very much so think that there is a broader climate of vilification, really, of the West, and America's bad and America shouldn't exist, and everything, like the deconstructionist narrative of let's tear it all down, let's destroy. I mean, unfortunately, this is something that, and a lot of folks might get offended with this, but the left only knows how to destroy. You will not see many things that are constructed by the left. The right actually builds things. And I'm not saying this as praise for the right, but that is, you know, and somewhere in there is the Muslim community. And again, the Muslim community is one thing, and then the Arab Muslim community is a whole other thing. And one thing that I've observed is that you have a lot of Southeast Asian Muslims that are trying to really prove to the Arab Muslims that they're real Muslims when it comes to the issue of Israel and Palestine. Translation: some of the worst attacks and threats of beheadings and violence and death against me have come out of the UK, mainly led by a lot of Southeast Muslims. There's a page on Twitter called Muslim Matters, and it has hundreds of thousands of followers. And for the longest time, they used to just have an obsession with me and inciting against me because I spoke out against Hamas. Now, mind you, I'm very pro-Palestine. I'm critical of Netanyahu. I've even caught flack for, I mean, I support the ICC, okay? I don't call it a genocide, but I think there's war crimes. I'm against the settlements. I'm a lot of things that these pro-Palestine people are for. But just because I'm against violent extremism, I'm against Hamas, I'm against the hostage taking, I'm against the villainization of the Jewish people, I'm against the great lie that this is all just against Zionism. This is not really anti-Zionism. Something that, you know, could have passed 10 years ago, but that ship has sailed long ago. And so I was just recently, Faisal, in Western Germany, outside of Dusseldorf, and I've been there a few times, and I've written about this, and I've said this publicly. This is not a secret. And I said this, I went to the Bundestag, I went to the German parliament and I spoke to a Green member of parliament. And I said, you guys have a problem in there. You guys have a serious problem in there, because it was these entirely isolated Muslim communities that they were literally walking on the street with their phones, Faisal, looking at Al Jazeera and looking at the Hamas upside down triangles propaganda videos attacking Israeli soldiers and stuff in there. My brother is a surgeon in Western Germany. He left Gaza a couple of years ago, and so I asked him, because I like to go into the lion's den, even if it's a little sketchy at times, and just see what are people thinking, and engage them with these ideas, because I don't want to just be talking to the Jewish community. I want to help transform our community, ideas beyond borders, or Faisal. And I had people, when I challenged, for example, the idea, because I lost 31 of my immediate and extended family in this war. And someone was telling me, well, inshallah, they had the ultimate prize. They're shuhada, they're martyrs, they're in heaven, they're taken care of. And I said, well, I don't necessarily go for the martyrdom narrative. I don't really think my family wanted to be martyrs. I think they wanted to be alive right now. I think those 14 children who are under 19, under 9 years old, would have built a better future for the Palestinian people. And it was as if I was a heretic. And it escalated, and I controlled my tone. People threatened to beat me up if I didn't stop maligning the martyrs, if I didn't stop maligning the resistance. And so that's in Western Germany. So that was really disturbing. That was very disturbing. Nevertheless, I am going to the UK next week, and I am going to some very poor parts of the UK, and I am going to mosques. in the UK, and I am going to speak in an interfaith sense, and I'm bringing some Jewish friends with me. And today we did a little prep, a final prep before the trip, and I was warned that a lot of these are not the Muslims in these communities are not going to be of Arab heritage. They're going to be of South Asian heritage, and on Israel and Palestine for, again, a variety of reasons. They've taken a hard line stance, and for them also, like, there is a thing, and not just with the Jewish community, but with the Christian communities. Like, a lot of them have unfortunately been isolated. And so I was both terrified and excited.
Yeah, no, and I know Faisal and Ahmadi both have like a very strong international reach and community. I want to bring it back to, the US and the domestic things. And I think Cal, you had, you have said this on record, which is, I think, is so profound, with Muslim Americans, some of us being like in our community, being like some of the most affluential leaders in different various sectors, right? In philanthropy, in business, in sports, in medicine. It's phenomenal, like the contributions that Muslim Americans have to this country. And yet we're kind of, boxed into this like narrative of victimhood, or can you kind of explain to that, and like how this, I don't know, I feel like it's so connected.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Zainab. I always hear, some of the members of the Muslim community saying that they're, marginalized or underserved. I do not believe that the Muslim population is underserved. I think the Muslim population is underrepresented. I think the Muslim population is doing really, really well economically, and in many different sectors. I mean, the average Arab Muslim I know is either a business owner, an entrepreneur, or a professional. So I do not consider Muslims as a marginalized community in this country. But I think we have to shift ourselves from the victimhood narrative and kind of put 9/11 in the past and move forward. And also, I had a conversation with Omar as well. I think what's lacking in the Muslim community is leaders and representatives. We don't have enough leaders and representatives that are engaging the community and kind of encouraging everyone to go out there I don't know many Muslims that actually contact their reps. I don't know many Muslims that actually go and meet with congressmen. So I think if we need leaders to engage these members and kind of bring them into these meetings, encourage them to talk about social issues, encourage them to talk about domestic policies. But I do not think, I think we need to change the narrative. We're not underserved.
May I add, I mean, the challenge, which I think is you're absolutely correct, is that the people who tend to be more organized, and they also tend to be the most ideological. Those professionals, I mean, I live in New York City, and I happen to know a lot of Muslims and Arabs who work in Wall Street and who are doing pretty well, like financially. They have no interest or time for them to engage in politics and etc., which I think really a missed opportunity, because many of these professionals and entrepreneurs need to do a better job engaging in these conversations and not leave it to only those who are the most ideological of the community. I mean, it's also a reflection again of like we don't have kind of I mean, we're coming from very diverse communities as well, but like we don't really have kind of role models to follow also. Like if you look at organizing around the Muslim Brotherhood, right? There is probably 1,000 books about that. There's so much materials. There's so many success stories that you can talk about of them winning elections and organizing, but we don't actually have an organizing document for moderates or liberals or secularists. So most of us have to start the war from scratch and try to figure it out of how to win while the war ideological side has already had a lot of education on the subject, a lot of history on the subject. So I think that's why I'm very optimistic about the existence of Mala and organizations that we need to organize. We need to have our voice out there and really build that document about how to run for politics and how to be engaged in civic life, because many people they don't know how to. They just don't know how to get engaged in these subjects.
I can I add a few things? I really wholeheartedly agree with Faisal, and I think that part of the challenge is that the Muslim Brotherhood is so good about showing up as moderate and really kind of building alliances and mobilizing and buying support very slowly and strategically to get to that point of taking over politically and then showing kind of their true colors as extremists. And so it's kind of like the race towards that representation that we're looking for, that moderate representation, is skewed against us, is set against us in the beginning, from before we even start, right? So that's part of it. And again, speaking to the funding, the support that these organizations receive, and the ideological support. And I really want to echo what Ahmed mentioned in terms of the South Asian community, that is in some ways almost kind of compensates for their lack of belonging in a Muslim world that is defined by Arabness as sort of a symbol of what is a true Muslim. A true Muslim is someone who presents this shajara, the family tree tracing back to the Prophet Muhammad. And so there is a supremacist, an ethnic supremacist idea that runs really deep and does a lot of damage in terms of ostracizing, marginalizing, and radicalizing Muslim communities abroad and in the Middle East. But we have to present and push and platform and support brave, courageous Muslim leaders. And it's even more critical because their lives are threatened, because, as Ahmed has shared, they attack you not just on Twitter and on social media, but in real life. And I go through this also, like Ahmed, all the time. And unfortunately, we are being sandwiched between two forms of extremism: an extremism that is obviously supported by the Muslim Brotherhood or the Islamic Republic, so either Shiite or Sunnite branches of Islamist fundamentalism that marginalizes us and pushes us away from the seating table and from even the potential of representing moderates. But we have also been completely marginalized by democratic, liberal, progressive voices who should be standing with us, who should be creating safety for us, who should be financing and supporting and nurturing these third spaces where we can create a different narrative. But they have not been doing that because they themselves have also fallen victim to the strategies of the Muslim Brotherhood and the Islamic Republic. So that's that. But ultimately, we really have to grow some courage and really stand in these values and push for moderation. And what I want to add very quickly, since Faisal really alluded to the Abraham Accords and the fact that October 7th showed a lot of people that not everyone was on board with the Abraham Accords, and there was a lot of resistance to even the idea of the Abraham Accords. Those voices will continue to be there. So decisive, courageous leadership has to say, this is the future. This is the agenda that can bring us closer together, because there is no conflict transformation with people refusing to meet each other, with boycotts, with a complete rupture in dialogue. There's no way we can push society and human civilization forward if we can't even speak and if we don't have spaces to speak. But ultimately, the Abraham Accords, what they did is that they empowered moderates more to speak up. And had we not had the Abraham Accords, we would not see the same number. I truly believe this. We wouldn't see the same number of Arab and Muslim moderate voices speaking on behalf of a more positive, sustainable peace, meaning who are courageous enough to call out extremism the same way that Ahmed does, right? So that's one. But are we going to continue to have other opinions who are anti-Abraham Accords, anti-regional integration? Of course, that's what it means to have this axis of resistance. They don't want regional integration and peace building to work, because if it works and it means building more prosperous economies, more stability, more peace in the Middle East, they have no chaos, no turmoil, no fertile environments through which they can rise in political power. We have seen this through the Arab Spring, one country after the other. That is what they aspire to create, that kind of chaos, so that they can capitalize on the mobilizing and organizing that they have built towards for decades. And we have to be clear about these things, and we have to be courageous enough to name them and speak the truth. I think part of why Democrats lost this time is they refused to speak the truth. They refused to call out the extremism that Arab and Muslim communities know viscerally in their bones.
I think this is something that I wish, and I know Omar has started the Muslim Coalition of America. Cal and I, in our group, we've started Mala. And really the thing is that we've always pushed for a respect for difference of opinions, right? So our leadership is not a monolith, that, Muslim Americans are not kind of, this is a golden opportunity, I think, in just challenging attempts to monopolize our leadership. And like what Faisal had said, there's a lot of really affluent, incredible Muslim American leaders in their own community living in their bubbles, but getting them engaged, that's kind of something that at least Mala has been doing, and Muslim Coalition for America for the past 10 years. And it's there's a much broader swath of, I think, Muslim leadership that can gain recognition in the American public square. And that's where I'll forever remain an optimist in that until I see something else. But, coming back into this, when it comes to leadership and a difference of opinions, I think that's important for us to cover, right? Because Kama, like you said too, like there was the issue of extremism that so many Muslims that, have come to America have escaped and have seen, and it's kind of like overshadowed, right, by this grievance narrative, or by, a monolith of how you should really be with this identity. So hence, breathing life into a difference of, a difference of opinion for a more robust leadership, I think is key.
One thing to really kind of always think about, I mean, when we're talking about the identity politics and kind of the left and the right, and one of the big conversations always, like in Europe, is like integration, right? The subject of integrating new immigrants to the country. I came in about 11 years ago. I mean, it still remains a question about when people talk integrate to America, integrate to what exactly, right? There is the identity politics. I mean, if somebody can identify integrating to America as integrating to identity politics, integrating to left-wing ideologies that are being taught in campus, that exist everywhere, and what we generally mean by integration is that we should move people towards kind of mainstream Americana, right? Be part of the larger American culture. So I think there's also larger conversation to be had in America itself about what America actually is, because I don't think there is an agreement on that. I mean, we live in a very kind of polarizing times in the U.S. kind of domestic space and the international space, because the domestic space in a way influencing the international space when shifting between political parties. So I would love the American Muslim kind of population to be part of the conversation. Like, what is really America? And I know it as a country that stands for freedom, human rights, democracy. That's my view of America. But I can walk 5 minutes outside and go to Bay Ridge, Brooklyn, or somewhere else, and I will have a different answer. So I think we need to have a national conversation about what America actually is. Ahmed, I think you want to say something?
Well, and precisely that. I mean, I was just going to say there needs to be traditionally in the post 9/11 world, the left were the most empathetic allies that the Muslim community had. And the left of post 9/11, even the left of just like 10 years ago, are radically different than the left of today. And so I think there needs to be a realization and an awareness and awakening to the shift that maybe there needs to be a delinking with the traditional left as the like for as the default allies, and that the whoever the Muslim community chooses to align to has to be a matter of interests, has to be a matter of values, has to be a matter of common ground and common pursuits. But I mean, it's like I'm glad I was muted when I was trying to speak, man, because it's like the other day, these kids, I was seeing these Muslim kids with their parents, and they were so interested in Halloween. But their Halloween, their parents, their Muslim parents told them, this is the shaitan, this is like the devil's thing, so we don't do it. And I literally, to the 7-year-old, I smuggled him a little like skull, wallah, I smuggled him a little stupid little skull face that I paid like $5 for. And it's like, I'm bringing that up as like, there also needs to be a renaissance within our own communities of like, what are the values, man? Like, really? Like, we're going to come and live in America and teach our kids that, like, Halloween is about the shaitan. Imagine then how that the person who thinks in that way and prevents their kids from going to school with their peers and participating in just the most benign, basic aspects of American culture. Imagine how that bleeds over to voting and electoral politics and their relationship with their neighbors and how they make purchasing decisions. And how that's not to say Muslims, like any other culture, they're allowed to have their unique individualities and they're allowed to have halal and haram. That's fine.
I mean,
Simply saying,
I can never be convinced to eat pumpkin spice. So forget about that. Is not something I will ever
well, we'll
participate in.
simply bypass that after. We'll bypass that. I agree. I don't spend $5 on coffee. Still, there needs to be a conversation within our community as to, I mean, and this is a minefield because this is talk about getting accused of being a heretic. I mean, there are elements of our community that do need. I mean, Islam is not practiced in a vacuum. Islam is practiced in a cultural context, and when you remove Muslims from the Arab world or South Asia or other parts of the Muslim world, and you put them in a Western context, I think that should be viewed as an opportunity to reimagine. And many people have done that, to be clear. But on a mass scale, I'm talking to reimagine what it means to be a Muslim living in a Western society versus closing down. I'm just going to go to the Arab store. I'm just going to go to my mosque. And we're just going to like be looking at Al Jazeera and khalas. That's it. Like, that's the part to me is about integration. Integration begins from within by deciding who are we, like what, because then it would be actually easier to plot course as to what do you want to integrate with.
Cal, you look like you had something to say also.
Oh, I was just gonna add to Ahmed's point. I experienced just this past Thanksgiving, you know, I was texting people saying happy Thanksgiving, and some of the responses were, oh, you mean happy November 28th or happy Giving Thanks Day, or, you know, they refused to recognize it as a federal holiday. And my argument was like, it's not that deep. We're not talking about the Native Americans and the genocide and whatever. It always goes down to that. It's a federal holiday. We celebrate as Americans. We get together, and it's about community and sharing a meal. Like, it's not that deep. And I think that's also a reflection of how people kind of like refuse and fail to integrate into this society. And then they live in this country and they're always criticizing every single policy.
Because they get fed a diet, Zainab, just in 20 seconds, they get fed a diet by the left of Thanksgiving is bad, holidays are bad, Christmas is bad. Independence Day is bad. Memorial Day is bad. Nothing about America is good. We just want to live here. We want to make money off of the United States. And like, there are some people, I'm talking about some people, not most Muslims. I'm not generalizing. And like, I deal with those folks all the time, but I'm talking about them getting like this negative reinforcement from elements of non-Muslims in the United States. And that's particularly what makes integration really difficult. They're being told, don't integrate. America is bad. You don't want to integrate in it. America is evil. America shouldn't exist.
Hama, you
Yeah.
look like you had something to say, and then we'll kind of wrap it up. It's a very
so much
engaged.
to say, but I'm very conscious of time. I mean, what was shared about Thanksgiving really hits home for me as a person and a family that kind of brings together different faiths and different cultures. And you know, my siblings live in Rhode Island, and I've been really kind of integrated into this country since the age of 14 years old, and so Thanksgiving is a big deal. It's what brings my family together. But I have found myself even feeling afraid because I belong to all of these progressive spaces growing up, being afraid of even celebrating Thanksgiving as an avenue that brings families who might have different political opinions, religious beliefs, cultural backgrounds together, which is really the promise of this country. And unfortunately, there's a big question here that we all have to deal with: is what are we doing about the radicalization of our communities, and how are we moving forward with a very effective de-radicalization strategy so that these American ideals, these opportunities, these avenues of dialogue, these symbols of what America should symbolize, you know, the freedom and liberty that Faisal spoke to, the tolerance, the democracy, these symbols are not brought down with the radicals that are effectively and very, very intentionally going after these symbols, that are calling out the belly of the empire, that, again, like Ahmed said, want to destroy what was built instead of reform it, instead of be an effective participant in state craftsmanship, which you have the beautiful right and opportunity to do in this country, right? And so we need to transition from these politics of resentment to what I call the politics of resilience, and de-radicalization is going to be a pillar for that work.
Yeah, well, this was we definitely need a part 2 for this conversation. And I want to, you know, for many of us here, my hope, and I know with Omar's as well, is that we create an institutionalized voice for our community, for policy making, media, and culture that really represents our identity, right? And that you can have, you know, whether you are ultra orthodox, whether you are secular, whether you are generation removed, you know, whether you are center left, center right, right? You can still be American, you can still be Muslim, you can still have pride in your heritage, and you can still embrace, you know, democracy and pluralism and all these incredible things in a way that is unique to you and that is empowering to your autonomy. And that's what Mala hopes to do. You know, January coming up is Muslim American Heritage Month. That's an initiative that Mala spearheaded in 2021. We are pushing it to a national level so that there actually is a Muslim American Heritage Month, just like there's a Jewish American Heritage Month, just like there's a Mexican American Heritage Month. You know, our community deserves that. I've always said that. Our Muslim Americans deserve better. And that's just the hope that I have, you know, with these small conversations, with these programs that we do, where we can serve mocktails, we can serve cocktails, and we can all come together. So hence, you know, I loved our panel today and just the different voices and faces and beliefs that, well, you know, all of us have a different perspective on all these different things, but we all have that one thing that's in common. That's that we're patriotic, we love America, pluralism, democracy. All of us have had, you know, our own journeys in here, our own identities, our own assimilations, but we're able to come together through that shared heritage that we have. So, you know, thank you once again.
Thank you,
And
Zainab.
thank you. And looking forward to the next conversation.